Okay, this video is going to be how you diagnose and replace a fuel pump in a 2003 Chevy S10. Obviously, the same steps will work with a number of different years. It'll also work with the GMC equivalent and the Isuzu. This particular truck happens to be an extended cab ZR2, but I believe it's the same fuel pump for the 4.3 liter engine that you're going to find in many different models of S10. Most of the steps actually apply to many other vehicles and the S10 Blazers as well, but in this case I'm going to show you specific steps on how to replace the actual fuel pump under the bed, which is going to be obviously specific to trucks with the same location of fuel pump. So first step is we need to diagnose the issue. So I'll show you how we get started with that. Okay, so the first thing you're going to notice when you have a bad fuel pump is when you try to start the car, it simply won't start, but it will crank over. Now, in this particular case, I'm not sure if you'll hear this on the video or not, but normally when you put your key in, and I will shut the door here just so that we're not hearing that beep. Normally I'm going to roll the window down here, but when you start your car, when you turn the key to the accessory position, you're going to hear your fuel pump kick in, and you're going to hear a little whining noise where it kind of primes the pump. And when I turn this key on, I don't actually hear anything. So when I do this to that position, and even when I put it all the way towards the getting ready to start position, there's no fuel pump noise. So I'm already confident that it's a fuel pump, but obviously, as you can see, if I try to start the truck, you know, it's just going to crank and crank all day, and it's never going to start. So let's go into the engine bay and see what we can find in there. Okay, so when you get in and open up the engine, the fuse center is on this right-hand driver's side. I guess that would be left-hand side. So anyway, pop this cover off. There's one little screw that holds that in. And you're going to notice all your fuses in here. If you actually look at the bottom of the cover, it will tell you where things are. Right side up helps. However, what you're going to notice is there's a fuel pump relay, but there's nothing labeled fuel pump in terms of fuses. So what you're going to look just to the left of the fuel pump relay, it says ECMB, a 20 amp fuse in this particular case. That's actually the fuse we're looking at. And if we look at the box, it's this yellow one right there is a 20 amp fuse right here. And then right next to it is the fuel pump relay right there. So there's a couple things to consider here. Number one, obviously, you would just want to test that fuse, make sure it's good. You do have a fuse puller up here if you need to pull it out. In my case, I've already tested that, so I know that's a good fuse. But that's the first thing you'd look for. Obviously, that's a 10-cent fix if that's all it is. The next thing would be this relay. Occasionally these could go bad. Now in this particular case, if you notice, there's the same relay and the same exact part numbers are found here and here, here and here. So all these relays are the same identical relays. One of these is for the horn, which I obviously know still works. So what I did is I swapped these two relays for the horn and for the fuel pump, and then I verified that the horn still worked. So I knew that that relay was okay, and I knew that the relay that I put into the fuel pump location was okay. So therefore we've eliminated all of this from the system, and we know that it's not an electrical issue in the fuse box side. So the next step that we need to do is we need to verify to see if there's any fuel pressure. And so that involves getting a fuel gauge, which that's what I'll do next. Okay, so this is the fuel pressure gauge that I have. I do not actually own one of these because, and honestly, this is the first time in my life I would have needed one. So what I did is I went down to my local O'Reilly's, and they will, if you put a deposit down, in this case it was about $109 or something like that, but you put a deposit down, they give you the kit, and you check it out, basically like a Loan-A-Tool program. Normally it includes a multimeter and the test leads and everything you need to test the electrical, but in this case the kit is actually missing that. They left a note letting me know, but it doesn't matter, I have my own meter. But they do give you the gauge, and that's really all I needed. It does also come with all the adapters depending on the vehicle that you're using. So in my case, the actual standard female threaded adapter on the end is all I need. And ultimately I'm just trying to verify what I already know. The fuel pump is bad. I should say that I strongly suspect the fuel pump is bad, but I do want to verify it before I spend the time pulling the bed off the truck to get to it. So first thing I'm going to do is hook this up to the truck, and we will see if my original theory is correct. So on the S10, to find the port that you're actually going to connect to, you go behind the air box here, and right down in here is the fuel line, and there's a little cap on here. You just want to pull that off. Don't lose it, hopefully. So I'm going to set that up here, and then take the female thread line from your fuel gauge, tuck that around there, and we're going to screw that right to that port. Now I have the connector fastened to the fuel line, which obviously I needed two hands to do that, which is why I paused the video. And in my case, I'm working alone here. So what I did is I just tucked the gauge under my wiper, under the hood, so it's looking through into the cab of the truck, which that obviously makes it easy for me to go in the truck as I'm working alone. And I will go to that gauge there. And now I am going to start, and right now I turn the key on, which I should have saw pressure already at this point, but if I turn it over, you notice that needle's not bumping at all. No movement on the needle, which that tells me I have no fuel pressure, which obviously confirms my earlier diagnosis that I have a bad fuel pump. So let's disconnect the gauge and get ready to install a fuel pump. Okay, now that the fuel pump is diagnosed, there's a couple different ways to get access to it. I believe the service manual probably tells you to crawl underneath the truck, disconnect the fuel tank. There's some shielding under there, there's all the fuel lines, there's a ton of stuff. That'd probably take you a couple hours, which is something I'm not really looking forward to doing. Another option that you see a lot of guys do is they go back in here to the bed of the truck and they cut a hole right above where the fuel pump is, and it's about 12 inches over from that little hump where your fuel filler neck goes through. I think it's about 6 or 8 inches back from that, and they'll just take a grinder and just basically cut a hole. Well, don't do that. That's the hack way of doing it. I mean, not only do you now have a hole in the bed of your truck, but you're going to spend time repairing that hole and either welding that panel on there or making some type of a panel that you can be removable. And I mean, you're going to spend a bunch of time doing that. So unless it's a farm truck and your bed is all rusted out and you just don't care about it anymore, I think that's probably a silly way to go. So the option I'm going to do is I'm going to actually lift the bed of the truck off high enough to get to the fuel pump. And in this case, the first step is to remove the fuel neck. Disconnect that so it's loose in here, so when you lift the bed, it's not holding it back. And in that case, there's a couple different ways to do it. Or I should say there's a couple different fasteners to remove that. And I will show you those. Okay, so the fasteners that you have, this is the Torx fastener. It's a T30 is the head on that. So there's one at the top here, and then there's one over on the side here that are T30s. In my case, they rusted in pretty good, and I actually snapped one in half, but at least it came out. So not sure if I'll have to probably drill that out before I put this back together. And as you can see, it's loose. The only other thing I had to do is with the retention strap on your gas cap that actually clips into here. There's a little plastic clip. You just pop it out with a screwdriver, or I just used my fingers actually, and that popped out. But at the bottom, some people I think this is a Torx. In my case, this was a little plastic push pin So I just popped that out with a flathead screwdriver. Sometimes you break these as they're coming out, so just be aware. But I have heard that some people have another Torx head in there, so I don't know if that's true or not. But in my case, it's really just the 3 fasteners that hold the neck in, 1 on the strap, and then as you can see, it's totally disconnected there, so it's just kind of flopping around. When we start to lift the bed off the truck, this will basically just fall down in there a little bit. So that's the first step, and the next step is we need to get the bed of the truck off. So let's crawl underneath and see what we have. Okay, so to disconnect the bed, you got to take off these bolts. Anywhere there's a bolt that holds the bed to the frame. So this is on the passenger side at the very front. You can see the gap from the cab to the bed right there. This is your first bolt. Basically, every time you see one of these frame rails that are across from your bed, these reinforcement struts, you're going to have a bolt. So there's 1 bolt there. You slide just a little further back here, you got your second one there that's exposed, and then you slide around to the back of the tire. Okay, in the back of the tire, just above the tailpipe, there's a hole in the frame rail, and if you look up at that hole, and I'll slide to the side here because it's not a fully boxed frame, you can actually see the bolt right there. So that's your third one you need to take out on this side. And then at the back, this is probably the one that's the hardest. It's at the very back, kind of above your electrical connections here, hiding in there. You'll see your 4th bolt. So there's 4 on the passenger side, and I'm going to go ahead and get those removed now. Okay, here's a better view of the rear bolts. There's the one here, which is probably the trickiest one to get to because there's the rear hitch is right below that. If you didn't have a rear hitch, this might be easier. I'm not sure. I think actually though the frame rail probably doesn't even, well, I think the frame rail has a hole in there, but I'm not sure it's big enough to get an extension through. And then of course there's the other one that I was pointing to earlier, which I actually have out in this case now, but you can see the hole where it actually went. This is the reason that I can get a better view here is I actually decided to take out the rear spare tire just to give me a little more room to work, and that, you know, obviously it only takes you about 2 minutes to pull that tire out of there. I recommend that just because getting these rear bolts out, there's one on each side like this, it's going to save you a lot of time, so just a little tip there. Okay, then on the driver's side you have the same rear bolt here that I've loosened, and then you have the other one which is up in the frame rail here. I guess my light's kind of shining there, but you can see it there, and there's a hole in the frame to get your extension up through. And I will show you the other front 2 in just a moment. Okay, and the front 2 frame mounts on the driver's side are right here, which you can see is there's the seam between the bed and the cab, so it's right behind that. And then just about a 12 inches foot up behind that is the next one, and those are the only 2 ahead of the rear wheels. So there are the 6 bolts that I removed from the bed. As you can see, they're about 2 inches long. The front 4 come out fairly easy with a ratchet. I used an air impact gun on these ones. They were pretty easy. The other 2 that are kind of buried behind the rear wheels, up in the frame rail, they need an extension. I was able to use the air gun on most of it, but I had to kind of get it started. I have a cheap air gun, doesn't work that well, so I had to get them started by hand, and then they came out fine. The rear 2, as you notice, there's only 6 bolts here. I left the rear 2 in. I just loosened them about an inch. That's going to allow me to tip the bed up but prevent it from sliding off. So those are the rear 2 that I left in, and I've seen people tip this bed up. I've seen other people tip it sideways. I don't know if there's really a big difference there, but I will say that in my case I noticed all the wiring is at the back, and so in order to not worry about having to disconnect or cut any wire ties and loosen up that wiring, it looks like there's enough play if I just tip the bed up from the front. I think it'll work easier. Plus I was a little worried about the clearance here between the bumper and the fender. If I tipped it sideways, I was worried that this bump out here might actually come in contact with the bumper as it wiggled around a little bit, and I didn't want to worry about that. Plus, to be honest, those rear two bolts are a bear. Those were by far the hardest to loosen up, and I could not get an air ratchet in there, therefore I had to do that by hand. And the amount of clearance in there, I was only able to get about 2 or 3 clicks with my ratchet, so it was a lot more work. I recommend, if you're going to do this job, you probably want to come in here a day ahead of time, maybe shoot some PB Blaster or some WD-40 or something on those bolts to get them loosened up a little bit easier. But they did come out. I got them about 1 inch out right now, and so now it's time to start jacking up the bed, and we'll show you the results of that in just a minute. Okay, for the bed, I just again make sure that your filler neck is loose before you start jacking anything. I like to make sure that I don't have radio on or anything. Be sure that you can hear if something's straining or if you're pulling on a wire or something. But basically there's a pocket down in here that you can tuck a 2x4 in. It really doesn't matter where you're going there. You just want to make sure it's somewhere that's not going to slip out when you get it up a little bit. And then I'm just using a standard floor jack. So as you can see, I'll just give this a few pumps here, and you can see that the bed is starting to go up. Not a bad idea to have another guy helping you here. You just want to make sure that nothing is binding as you're going. And of course you have to kind of readjust, but I'm going to get this up a little bit, and then if I tuck around behind the wheel here, or under the wheel well, I'm going to try to get my light on. Right there you can already see that's your fuel pump right there. So I need to go up probably another 4 or 5 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a jack stand above the frame rail here and then reposition my jack so I can get a little more clearance. Now I have the bed jacked up and I have it supported with some 2x4s, but I also have jack stands supporting the weight here. Just a little extra insurance on both sides. And then I have a crush block kind of in the back there. But as you can see, there's plenty of room to get to the fuel pump. There's probably a good 16 inches above that to pull it out and to do what you need to do. So the next step is to actually remove the fuel pump. Another little tip, I removed my end gate. Tailgate. The reason that I did that is that you can notice how low this gets towards your bumper as it's tipping back, and I didn't want anything binding on me when I was dealing with it. Plus, it just reduces the weight a little bit to make it easier to jack up and whatnot. So I thought that that's a good idea. And then the bolts that were removed, those are 15 millimeter. So like I said, there's 3. There's 2, about one right here and one right here. And then there's one about right there. The back bolts are just loosened again. I didn't take those all the way out. That's what prevents it from slipping off as I'm tipping it. So basically you're going to have 6 bolts to remove, 2 to loosen, all 15 millimeter. That's really the only socket that you're going to need for this job. Okay, now that we have the bed lifted up and we can disconnect the fuel pump connectors, you're going to notice 2 connectors if it's a factory pump. You have the fuel sending connector, which I believe is this 3-wire one, and the actual fuel pump is the 4-wire square connector, which I believe most of the kits now, they had a lot of problems with this connector failing. So most of the kits you're going to find will include a new wiring harness that you need to splice into this to replace the blue 4-wire connector. However, I was able to get mine off, no problems. Obviously this is the factory connector. But what I did in this case, just to confirm the diagnosis, is there's a gray wire here, and what you want to do is check the voltage on that when you're starting the car, when you're cranking it. The fuel pump will come on for a couple seconds right when you turn the key, and then when you're cranking it, and then when you shut the key off, the fuel pump remains on for a few seconds. And so you either need 2 people for this piece if you're using a multimeter, or in my case I have a remote start, so I was able to sit here with my meter and just push the button and watch for the voltage. I did verify I have 12 volts on this gray wire while cranking and during priming, which means Obviously I have voltage to the fuel pump itself just is no good. So I pulled out the pump. In my case, I labeled the lines. It's probably impossible to get them mixed up, but I wanted just to be safe because I have to order the pump, and so it's going to be sitting here for a few days. And then as I have the pump out, I just put a little piece of plastic and a towel, and then I just used an old hitch just to kind of weigh that down. Mostly just to prevent the gas fumes from coming out, but also there's a lot of corrosion and whatnot under the bed, a lot of dirt. I just didn't want anything getting bumped and some gravel falling into my fuel tank, so this is just a little extra insurance on that. But now that I have the wires disconnected, what I'm going to do is, obviously the vehicle, the ignition is off, but I'm going to pull the pump for the ECMB, and I'm going to pull the fuel pump relay, and have those out of the vehicle when I install the new pump. Just a little extra insurance. We don't want anything sparking when you're working with these connectors and working around a lot of fuel. So that's the next step, but let's take a look at the filter, or excuse me, the pump. So this is the fuel pump assembly I pulled out of the vehicle. I really couldn't get the camera in there to show you, but there's this ring around the top. It's got a retention clip on the back side that you want to go ahead and you kind of have to hold that back, or you can pry a screwdriver in there. And then it's got these little indentations. You can take a flat screwdriver and just kind of pound on it with a little bit of force, and this ring will just twist. At that point, the pump itself will kind of spring up at you, because if you notice, it's actually spring loaded here, and it sits down at the bottom of the tank. Now, this reservoir will probably be full of fuel depending on how much fuel you had in the vehicle at the time. So just use a lot of caution when you're pulling this out of there. You don't want to spill all that fuel all over the place. I just kind of dumped it back in the tank as I was lifting, but here's your fuel level float that basically tells you how much fuel you have. And then if we look at the bottom of the pump, you can actually see that filter at the bottom. And these just pop off, but basically this is just the filter that is filtering all the fuel that runs in through your pump. Normally I think they're more of like a white or an off-white color, but this one's been in there probably for a lot of years, and you can tell the color of that. I think this is the factory pump. I'm not the original owner of the vehicle, but if I look at the numbers at the top, this is a Delco pump. Based upon the dirt and the corrosion here, I'm going to assume it's original pump. I'm not really sure. So now the question is what I do to replace it, and there's two options. You can either replace this whole unit. You can just buy this unit. The only thing you have to do is you take this ring off. You reuse that on your truck, but everything else, including this rubber gasket here, everything else comes in the kit. I priced that out locally, and at O'Reilly's Auto Parts, that was $322 for the one that they happen to have in stock. The others they would have to order. I asked for the rebuild kit, which includes the pump, which you can kind of see that's just right down in there, and it includes all these gaskets, the filters, everything you need. That rebuild kit you can find around for about 40 bucks, but nobody locally had that in stock. If the rest of your fuel level sender and everything is working fine, that's a good option, although it's a little more labor because you have to pop that out of there, you have to take this hose off, redo the connectors, and hopefully nothing breaks in the process. But again, $40 is a huge difference. My local GM dealer did not have that rebuild kit. They said they don't even stock it, so I unfortunately will have to order that. However, if I wanted to order this whole unit, and if I can't find the rebuild kit easily, I may end up just going to an auto parts place online like Summit Racing or something, ordering this whole kit. They're usually about $225, $250 bucks, depending on what brand you're going with and whether it's an OEM or non-OEM. Obviously the Delco or the Delphi are the OEM brand that you could probably put in there, but there's a lot of other brands, same type of thing. So we'll see what we get, and I guess my next portion of this video should show the new pump. Well, before I actually order the replacement pump, I wanted to take this one apart and just be sure that I could get everything apart without breaking anything. Here's the actual pump, just the 12-volt connection in there. This is where it actually pumps out. The intake is at the bottom there. So that's basically all it is, the pump. And then these are the filters. So there's one filter that goes on the bottom of the pump, and those are just a press fit. And that's actually down inside of this cylinder. The other filter is what you saw earlier, that's at the bottom of the whole unit, which would be, it would attach to that coupler right there. And again, just a press fit, so you can just get like a little thin flat blade screwdriver and pull that off. The pump sits within this rubber cup, and that's just basically an isolator cup. It just sits down in there. It's just pushed down in here, and then that's just to isolate it and eliminate vibration and whatnot. So it can only really go in one way. You just basically pull the pump out. There is a couple of wire connections here. There's the 2-wire connection that powers the pump, and then there's a hose. This is just actually, I'm not sure. I think this is probably like an overpressure hose that when it pumps what the fuel that it needs, and then to prevent the pump from burning up, basically it's got this relief and it just dumps it right back in there. So that hose popped off really easy. This other one took a little persuasion to get that one off. However, the new kits, they always come with a new hose, and the reason is because it's nearly impossible to get it off without damaging it. And you can kind of see I belled the end out there a little bit. It would probably still work, but I mean, honestly, it's a 29-cent hose. It makes sense to replace it. Everything else on this unit is pretty much just the standard. You get the modules, the wiring modules on the top, and then you have the float mechanism, which that all works fine. So if I can find the rebuild kit, that's the way I'm going to go. Save a couple $100. But if I can't find the rebuild kit, I'll order one of the whole unit, and then we'll just replace that. So let's see what we found. I ended up buying the rebuild kit because instead of $250 to anywhere from over $600 for this whole assembly, I was able to buy just the rebuild kit, which is right here, AC Delco. I did have to buy this online. Nobody stocked it locally. But here's the part numbers, the GM part number, if you do need the same rebuild kit. This, shipped to my door, was $42.49. So that's obviously a significant savings over the whole unit. And when you open this kit up, what you get is you get all new filters, you get all the replacement hoses, there's wire connectors in here. There is the new connector itself is if you had a different style pump and you needed that for your old pump, or your new pump, excuse me. And if you look at the top and match that up, you'll know whether you need it or not. In my case, I don't need it because this is an original AC Delco pump being replaced by an AC Delco pump. They also give you some hose clamps in here that's for this hose, so that's nice. And then of course you have your fuel pump itself, which is pretty standard. It's the exact same pump, just a newer version of it. So that's actually what we really needed. And then of course at the bottom you have there's some instruction manuals, and they give you some instructions if you need to do the wire harness. So everything's in there. We just need to go ahead and get the old out and the new in, and we'll see how it turned out. One thing I'm not sure about at this point is it does come with this new gasket. However, the old gasket is a little different style. It was, it kind of comes around the whole collar here, and this whole unit, it's this whole sleeve here. So I'm going to clean that one up and see if I just maybe will reuse this rubber gasket rather than putting a new one in, but I'll see that after I get it put together. This is the unit fully assembled. You can see the new fuel pump down in the reservoir. We got new filter put on the bottom, new filter on the bottom of the pump, the new hose put on with the hose clamps on both ends, which you probably can see. I didn't have to use the wiring harness in my case. My existing wiring harness was okay. However, if you do need that, it comes with the harness itself. Pretty standard harness, and then it actually comes with these crimp connectors to put it on. So that's pretty self-explanatory. In my case, I had a little rubber cup that sits around the pump. I reused that as opposed to this replacement that they have, which would go at the bottom of the pump if you didn't have that rubber sleeve. The pumps are, they're very close in size, although I would say the new pump is slightly larger. So it was a little snug fit getting it into that rubber collar, but it managed. The hardest part of this entire process is getting this white hose put onto the pump and onto the assembly to replace this old discolored hose. It does say you can use a little petroleum jelly to lubricate that as you're putting it in. Obviously don't use too much because that's going to be into your fuel system at that point. But what I actually did is this type of hose has a memory, so I was able to use a little bit of heat. You can use a heat gun or a torch, very low heat setting. Just give it a real quick touch of heat, and that kind of gives it a little more flexibility, and then you can slide it on. Once it cools down, it retains its memory and goes back to its original shape. So you're going to have a very short window of time, but once you get it on there, it'll be very, very snug. Plus these extra hose clamps they put in here this time in the kit, that helps a little extra insurance to ensure that it's super tight. And then this other hose, the black one, is just a press fit. So that's pretty much it. Now it's time to install it. Okay, fuel pump is down in there, and it really only goes one way because there's some orientation tabs that basically force it to be this direction, with the actual fuel lines connecting to the driver's side about a 45-degree angle. So at this point, what I've done is, again, I have the fuel pump fuse and the relay pulled, so now I'm going to hook up the fuel lines and the electrical connections. Electrical connections and fuel lines are now installed. Everything is snug. So the next step is to go up to the fuse box, and the relay that I pulled, it goes into the fuel pump. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall that. And then our 20 amp fuse that's just to the left of it, install that. And now we're ready to try it out. Okay, now the first thing I want to do is I want to turn the key forward but not start the engine, just to prime the pump. Do that about 3 or 4 times. And now we're going to go ahead and start it. And that's the first start. Works like a champ.
Put this back together, mister.
Well, that's pretty much it. Road tests are okay. Fuel pump's working, and that's the end of it. Obviously, I put the bed back on, put the tailgate on, redid the bolts by the fuel filler neck. In my case, because I snapped one off, I had to find another one that I had in my kit, but that worked fine. I put the tailgate back on, everything's hooked up, everything's working. No issues, and that's basically how you replace a fuel pump. One thing I will say about this project is that the new fuel pump is way quieter than the old one. They're both AC Delco pumps, but the new one is so quiet that when you actually prime the pump, you can't even hear it. So I will admit, when I first turned that key, I didn't hear the sound of the pump. I was a little nervous, but obviously it all worked out. So bottom line is, you can do this. It's not that difficult. It's a few hours of your time. The hardest part is removing the bolts for the bed, but all things considered, considering this is probably an $800 or $900 repair at the dealer, I'm considering a $42 investment for a new fuel pump rebuild kit well worth my time. So hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it works out for you too.